Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. So we are at second episode of Linux Zero to Hero series. In the previous episode, we learned about the fundamentals of Linux. We learned what is operating system, what is the structure of Linux operating system, that is, what is a Linux kernel, what is the CLI in Linux. Then we learned about Linux distributions, how to set up Linux machine on your personal computer. And finally, we learned about package managers. In today's video, we will learn about folder structures. So by default, when you set up a Linux machine, there are a lot of folders that are available on that Linux machine. Let's try to understand what is the significance of that folders. So for that, in the previous lecture, we learned how to start a Linux system on your Windows machine or Mac OS using Docker. I'll just try to repeat that. So I press Control D so that I'm out of that Linux environment. So what we learned is to run this particular Docker command. So you can find this command also in the GitHub documentation. If you go to episode 1 and click on setup.md, so you will find this sophisticated Docker command. And when you run this, it sets up a Linux container or Linux environment on top of your Windows machine or Mac OS as well. Only thing is you just need to have Docker desktop running. Okay. So just copy that and change the path accordingly. So I'm using users Veeramalla Ubuntu data as the location on my personal computer, that is on my Windows computer. So this is the storage that my container will get. Perfect. So once you run this command, you will get a container ID because I already ran it. I have the container ID. Abhishek, how do I get that container ID again? Like yesterday I ran this command and now I don't have the container ID. Very simple. You can just run this command docker ps and this is the container ID. So just copy it, clear the screen, docker exec -it followed by the container ID /bin/bash. For some reason, let's say you don't want to use this or you don't want to use WSL as well. So you can spin up a EC2 instance on AWS or you can spin up virtual machine on Azure. Once you spin that up, just click on connect. Use any of these options. I will use EC2 instance connect. And when I click on the connect, you will get the same Linux environment, right? So you can use any of these approaches. Either you can go for WSL or Docker environment on your Windows or Mac OS, or you can use an EC2 instance on the Windows machine. Option is yours. Okay, so Abhishek, now I logged into the Linux environment and I see something here. What exactly is it? Right? So let's first understand it. It has a meaning. It's not that it does not have a meaning. So basically, what that particular line says. So it says root @ubuntu /dev /#, right? So what does this mean? So the first part of it is basically the user with which you logged into the Linux environment. Abhishek, what is user? So when you use your Windows laptop on day-to-day basis, you're quite used to using administrative user. So when you buy a laptop, you get an administrative user or you will be asked to set up a username. And every day when you use your Windows laptop, you use that administrative user. However, in real time, when you use a Linux server, in your organization, multiple people might be using that Linux machine. So by default, you will get a user called as root user, which is the administrative user on Linux. However, Your DevOps engineering team or system administrator team, they will set up multiple users. For example, for Abhishek, they might set up a user called Abhi. For Santosh, they might set up a user called Santosh, right? For different people, they will set up users and access for these users will be granted. Only the root user has administrative privileges. Rest of the users access is restricted according to what they do in the organization, right? So the first part of it is the user with which you logged in. By default, when you create environment using Docker, you log in as a root user. At the same time, when you check EC2 instance, here the username is Ubuntu. So when you create an EC2 instance, what it does, along with the root user, it creates automatically another user for you, and that username is Ubuntu. We will learn more about how to create the users, how to manage permissions of that user in our next lecture, which is user management. Okay. So for now, just understand about root user. Okay. So this says I'm logged in as an administrative user. This is basically your host name, right? An identity for your host. This does not mean a lot in this particular case because anyways you logged into the system that you already know, unless you are dealing with 100 machines or 100 Linux environments. Now, colon is just a separator. It does not mean anything. But then you have this important thing that is slash. What is slash? Slash here is basically the path or your present working directory. And this particular thing has a lot of significance. In this entire line, there are two things which are important. One is the user that which you logged in. Two is the path that you are currently in. Now, what is this path? Very simple. In our previous lecture, we learned about hardware. And when we learned about hardware, I explained you something called as file system. So what is file system? In layman language, file system is nothing but storage. And for this storage, there is a parent location or there is a root location. That is nothing but slash. So by default, when you get a storage, the path that you get is just the slash path. And all your files and folders by default are created in this particular location. Just imagine Google Drive, right? For simple example, when you create a Google Drive, by default, you get a parent location. And within that location, you can create multiple folders, right? And within each folder, if you want, you can create another folder. Within this folder, you can save files, right? Similarly, when you buy a file system or when you get a Linux environment with a file system, the default path that you get is always the slash path. You can create any number of folders, any number of files within this particular system that is slash. Okay. So now what does this mean? This means you are at the root of your file system. Now this particular thing might change from system to system, environment to environment. When I logged in using the Docker environment, this is the path that I have. But when I logged in to the EC2 instance, you can see the path is very different. Now let's try to understand what is this path. Okay. So this path here is Ubuntu @ host name. That 172, everything that you see is basically the host name. Then you have a separator. Separator is colon in this case as well. Then you have $ampersand, right? Not dollar, tilt followed by ampersand or dollar. My bad. So basically this is tilt and this is ampersand or dollar. Anyways, so here this is not much important because this is just a separator. And this colon is also not that important. It is a separator. What is important? Important thing is again the user followed by tilt. So when you got EC2 instance, what it did, apart from root user, it created another user called Ubuntu user. And when you logged in to the EC2 instance, the default user is Ubuntu. This is for security purpose. EC2 instance did not want to grant you root user or administrative permissions out of the box. That's why it its default sign-in is Ubuntu user. So it will have less permissions when compared to root. Okay, then what is this tilt? So tilt basically is slash home slash Ubuntu. So Docker environment gave you direct access to the file system. That is, this is your default location. Whereas when you logged into the EC2 instance, the default path is slash home slash Ubuntu. Abhishek, how do you know tilt is slash home slash Ubuntu? Basically, tilt is the home directory of any user that you logged in. So if you logged in as Ubuntu user, tilt means slash home slash Ubuntu. Let's say if you logged in as Abhi as a user, tilt means slash home slash Abhi. Now, Abhishek, what is this slash home slash Ubuntu slash home slash Abhi? It's very simple. As I told you, this is the parent location of the file system or root location of the file system. Within this, you will create a directory called home. And within the home directory, you will create directories for every user on your Linux system. This comes by default when you create a user. It creates home folder within the file system. And within the home folder, it creates a folder for the user that you have created. Again, you will see this when you learn about user management in the next section, right? So this is the difference between the Docker environment entry point and the default entry point in the EC2 instance. Now it is clear to you, right? So now let's understand when you get a Linux environment, what are different folders that you get and what are different files, packages that you get. If you just search for ls-ltr, you will find various directories. So ls command is basically list command, which will list all the folders and all the files in that particular directory. So within your root file system, you have so many directories. Abhishek, why are these directories important? Very simple. If you noticed, I entered ls command and it listed the files. Now, how does your Linux system know ls means to list the files? So there has to be a package, and that package is provided in one of these folders. So basically, Linux environment has this package already installed in one of these folders. That's why when I entered ls command, it listed the files. Similarly, if I do, let's say, mkdir test, it creates a new folder called test. But how does the Linux system know what is the meaning of mkdir? Same, there is a package in one of these folders and that let you create a new folder. Similarly, all the administrative activities, by default, any task that you need to perform, most of the things are set up in the Linux environment. We learned this in the last class as well. If you look at the structure of Linux, I told you on top of the Linux kernel, there are some system utilities and there are some system libraries along with the CLI. CLI is something that we are already interacting. Apart from CLI, you have system libraries and system utilities. All of these system libraries and system utilities are basically present in these folders. So let's try to understand the meaning of each folder. If you're on EC2 instance, what you need to do, you can just run this command sudo su hyphen. When you run this command, you will switch to the root user. Then you can just run cd slash, just to take you to the root location of the file system. And then you will find the same files, right? So you find exact same files that you see here. Okay, but Abhishek, what are these commands doing? Sudo su hyphen, what is exactly cd slash doing? You might know what is cd slash doing, but you are not aware of sudo su hyphen. We will cover that in the future classes. Don't worry about it at this point of time. Cool. Now we can learn just using the Docker environment instead of switching between the different environments, that is EC2 and Docker. Let's start with the first folder. Okay, we have something called sbin. What is sbin? You can just go to ls sbin and you will see that there are a lot of system binaries in this particular folder. So sbin means system binaries. So what are these system binaries? Basically, the commands or the binary files that you can use to manage your system. Let me give you one simple example. There is something here called user add. So what is user add? This particular command or this particular binary helps you to create the users. As a Linux administrator or somebody owning this Linux machine, if you want to create users, you will use this command. And when you run this command, this actually goes to this particular folder, that is sbin followed by user add. And from here, this command gets executed and a user is created. For example, user add Abhi. When I run this, a user called Abhi is created on this Linux machine. And I can go to that user by using su command, su Abhi. It will ask for password or it will directly switch to the user because I did not provide the password. I'll press Ctrl D to get back to the root user. Going back, what exactly are the packages or files present inside sbin? These are nothing but system binaries which helps you manage your system as an administrator. For example, user add to add the user, group add to add groups, user del to delete the group, maybe to add a new shell, check the CPU, check the memory. All of these are present within system binary folder. I have also provided detailed documentation in case after watching this video, you want to summarize. You can just go to readme file of day 2. You will find sbin is system binaries for administrative commands. Perfect. Now, let's go to the next folder. Again, I'll just run ls-ltr. Then let's look at lib. The name lib itself explains that it is library folder. Sbin is system binaries. Lib is basically libraries. What exactly are is inside this library file? So I'll just do ls/lib and you will see there are different kinds of libraries that are available here. And these libraries are used by your Linux kernel. So as a user, you don't use these libraries. These are used by Linux kernel for making system calls with the hardware or basically to execute its action. Then you have a folder called boot. So boot is basically for booting your Linux machine, that is starting or restarting your Linux machine. So when your Linux machine restarts or maybe it starts, whatever inside the boot folder are basically helps the Linux machine during the restart. Basically, the commands that it requires while starting or actions that it needs to execute during the start of the machine. If I do ls boot, I will not find anything on the container environment. Whereas if I run the same command, ls boot, so you will see there are a lot of commands on the EC2 instance. Why? EC2 instance is a virtual environment. That is, this actually restarts your Linux environment, whereas this is basically simulation. So that's why here you don't find anything inside the boot. If you just restart the container environment, it does not do any action. Whereas if you start EC2 instance, or if you just stop the instance and restart it, there are certain actions that it performs, and that is basically using the files which is inside the boot. Cool. Then you have bin. So there is slight difference between sbin and bin. So what is difference between sbin and bin? Sbin stands for system binaries, whereas bin stands for user binaries. So if I go to lsbin, so you will find commands here as well, but these are not administrative commands, or these are not the system commands. Maybe you can grant access to these commands to your regular users as well. For example, if I just use date, it will just print the date and time on this Linux machine. Now, this doesn't have to be administrative action, right? Anybody can get access to this particular binaries or this particular commands. Similarly, let's say user wants to check difference between two files. There is one command in Linux which is called as the diff command. Now, same, checking differences between two files does not have to be an administrative access. So you can give access to anyone on this command, right? Similarly, there is link command, there is command like mount, which is to mount a file system, or maybe sed. Sed is basically for performing a operation on the file system or modifying a particular line on a particular file. So all of the commands that you have, or all the binaries that you have inside bin, are non-administrative. So if you are a Linux admin, what you can simply do, you can grant permissions to sbin only for system administrators, whereas you can grant access to bin to every user, right? So that's why Linux segregated the commands in two different folders. If it did not segregate commands in two different folders, everyone might have action to every command on the Linux machine. I'll just repeat this. So within the Linux system that you create, basically there are a lot of binaries. What are binaries? Binaries are nothing but files, executable files. In simple sense, you can consider it as commands. So out of the box, there are hundreds of commands, but some of the commands are administrative commands, whereas some of the commands are non-administrative commands. So if a user executes these commands, there is not severe action. Whereas if you grant access to these commands to regular users, they might create dummy users, they might create passwords to the users, and they might probably hack the system or corrupt the system. So that's why Linux segregated them to sbin directory and this to bin directory, right? So sbin directory, you can grant access to admins, and bin directory, you can grant access to everyone. In fact, all of these binaries are within a parent folder, which is /usr. So if you look for /usr sbin, you will find these commands. And if you look for /usr followed by bin, you will get these commands. Let me show you. So that's why when you see sbin, it says sbin is a shortcut for user sbin, and bin is a shortcut for user bin. Abhishek, what is this shortcut? Imagine you have a movie or you have a game that you play regularly on your Windows machine. And this is in, one of the directories, something like C, Abhishek, XYZ, ABC, and then you have the movie file here. Every time you don't want to go into C, Abhi, XYZ, ABC, and then run the game application. What you simply do is you right click on this particular file and you say create shortcut, right? In Windows, you have this option to create the shortcut. And when you create this on your home directory or any location that you provide, a shortcut is created to the file. When you execute the shortcut, it actually runs this command and file is executed from this location itself. We are using the same concept in Linux as well. However, in Linux, we don't right click or something. We use a command called ln. We will come back to that later, but these are the shortcuts. Sbin is shortcut for user sbin, lib is shortcut for user lib, and bin is shortcut for user bin. If you go to user folder, you will realize that. So when I just do ls/usr, you will see it has the bin directory, it has the lib directory, and it has the sbin directory. Apart from that, it has games, which is trivial in our discussion. This is not at all important. Then you have libx, again, not very important for our discussion. Then you have share. Let's say you're using this Linux environment for sharing the files or basically using it as a common storage location. You can store that files within the /share. src, just like any source code that you have, any common thing that you want to share in terms of the source. But the important things within USR or user directory is basically bin, lib, and sbin. And shortcuts are created for all three of them. Okay, so till now we learned what is sbin, what is bin, what is boot, what is bin, and what is USR. Again, I'm repeating, at any point of time, if you want to revise these concepts, you can just go to this GitHub repository, and here you have the complete explanation of what I'm covering in the section. Cool. So let's go back, and now let's see the other folders. What is SRV? So these shortcuts, or these names actually have a meaning. If you want to remember that, USR is basically user, right? Similarly, SRV is basically server. Okay, so you have a folder called SRV where you can store configuration files or any important information related to your web servers. By default, when you create some web servers, it will actually store some files in the SRV. By default, it doesn't have anything. If I just do ls srv, there are no files here because I don't have any web server installed on this Linux environment. Cool. Then let's see what is OPT. Again, in OPT, there is nothing, but OPT is a very important folder in your Linux environment. When you join an organization, or maybe you're working in a team and you want to install some third-party dependencies. Abhishek, can you give some examples? Let's say you want to install a particular version of Java, or maybe you want to install a third-party tool called Abhishek. What you will do is you will use this folder called /opt. So if I have to install a custom version of Java, so I will go to opt, okay, and then as an administrator I can do it, or If you are a non-admin user, you need to switch to root, or you need to take root permissions, or you at least need to have access to /opt folder. You will learn that in user management. Okay, anyways, so you will go to opt folder and you will create a directory here, mkdir. Let's say you want to install a tool called custom tool. So you will say custom tool. You will switch to that custom tool, and all the files related to that custom tool, the executable things, any shell scripts related to it, or documents related to it, you will place them inside the /opt/custom tool. So this is a common location for all your third party dependencies. Abhishek, why can't I do it within my user? For example, I have a user called Ubuntu. So why can't I just go to ls/home/Ubuntu or cd tilt? As I explained you, both are same. So why can't I just go to cd tilt and you know uh, copy the files related to that custom tool, or create a shell script related to that custom tool? If you do that, who will have access to that custom tool? Only people who has access to /home/Ubuntu or /home/Abhishek. In general, this particular directory is very specific to your user. You might not want to grant access to your user home directory to everyone in the organization. Maybe you are saving some personal files here, or maybe you have some personal scripts here. That's why for third party dependencies, you need a common location, and that common location is /opt. This is where people knowing Linux and people just using Linux differ. Sometimes people install third party dependencies in random locations. Some people just install in /tmp. Some people just create a random directory called xyz, and within that they start installing third party dependencies. But person who knows Linux, they would create and use that within /opt folder, because this is a common practice in Linux. Great. Okay, going back, cd slash. So why I'm using cd/, this will take me to the file system directory, root directory of the file system. Again, I'll just run ls-ltr. Then you have a folder called mnt. So mnt means mount. Why is this important? You know, system administrators in Linux, they usually have a task which is adding more space to the file system. So this Linux environment is created. After some time, let's say initially it is created with 20 GB storage. After some time, 20 GB is completely utilized, and you want to add 30 GB more. So Linux administrator can do it. But for doing it, what Linux administrator needs to do? First, they need to procure a 30 GB disk somewhere, right? A temporary or a permanent disk. And then they have to mount it, or first add it to this temporary location, mount, right? /mnt. So they will first mount it at /mnt, and then they will add this disk to the file system. For doing this, there are commands. We will learn that in episode 9, I believe. We have a session for disk management, that is episode 10. For now, just remember /mnt is a folder that is used by the Linux administrators to mount new volumes. Volumes are nothing but new disks. Okay. So every folder has a meaning. That is what you need to understand. Like sbin is for system binaries, bin is for regular binaries, mnt is for mounting a volume. So you need to know what each folder is doing and use the specific folders for working on the specific tasks. Then you have media. You can skip it. This is just for adding, let's say, any audio files or MP4 files. Usually, as DevOps engineers, as developers, you might not use this folder called media. People who are using this as their personal machines. Some people use Ubuntu on their personal laptops. They might be using media section, but usually we don't use it. Then you have a folder called var. What is var? So var is basically used to store log files, right? Majorly it is used to store log files or maybe some libraries, not the regular libraries, but some third party libraries or libraries that you download from the internet. But mostly var is used for log files. Sometimes when you install a server or when you install a third party application, it might add the scripts to var lib followed by any folders that they want. Abhishek, which kind of log files? Let's say you install a web server. Now, this web server, like Apache or HTTP, the logs of this server, it might log to /var/log. You can find them by default within the var folder as well. So if I do /var, so you will find there is a log folder, there is a lib folder, there is a cache folder, and multiple other things. If I go to /var/log, within this, you might find some temporary logs or not temporary logs. You might find some logs that are related to the system. But when you install Apache or HTTP D, it might create another folder inside /var/log. And within that folder, you have the log files related to the web servers or your third party applications. Okay, so this was about var. Then let's see the next folder, home. I already covered home. If I just do ls/home, you have a folder for Ubuntu, right? Why you have a folder for Ubuntu? When you created this Docker environment, it created Ubuntu user. However, you logged in as root user. If I create another user, for example, if I do add user Abhi, okay, it says add user command does not exist. I can quickly do that. Apt install add user. Okay, now if I do add user Abhi, okay, it already exists. Let me do Abhishek, for example. Okay, it is asking for new password. So I'll just give a random password. Just enter random details for now. Okay, now it says Abhishek1 is a user that is created. So now within home, you will find Abhishek1 as well as Ubuntu, right? This is what I explained 10 or 15 minutes back. Whenever you create a user using add user command, right? So you will see within the home, Abhishek folder is created or the user folder is created. Similarly, Ubuntu or the user folder is created. Now within these folders, you can create files that are specific to you. But for that, I need to log in as Abhishek user or I need to log in as Ubuntu user. If I am saving some files at slash, that means everybody can access that files and you are basically making that files public. If I'm storing that within my user, they are private to me. Cool. So this is about home. Home itself explains, right? This is a home directory. Then let's see, where were we? So we completed var, then we looked at home. So let's look at the data. So what is this data folder? So data, if I just do /data, this is basically for storing any data. Let's say I want to share the data with other people, or I have data related to organizational billing information, right? Organizational cloud cost, or people in the organization. Any data that can be shared with other people in the organization or other admins in the organization, you can put that within slash data. It depends on how you restrict the access to the folder. Okay, cool. What's next? So after data, you have set of temporary or volatile files or volatile folders. So the data that is inside this are basically not permanent, right? For example, you have proc. So proc is basically virtual file system for your processes and system information. You will learn more about proc and dev when we use some scripts, or when we head to the next lectures of this particular course. For now, you can just understand they are temporary folders where you can store files that are not permanent. Similarly, temp as well, right? Temp is also used. The name itself says temporary. Imagine you want to have a file that only lives for certain time. Instead of deleting it after using, what you can do is you can create that files or folders within TMP. For example, if I go to TMP and if I create a directory called Abhi, right now you have this directory, but usually every file system or any Linux environment, they have a time frame where they clear the temporary directory, just like recently deleted images on your mobile. So when you delete image on your mobile, it still stays on the recently deleted images. After a while, maybe after 30 days, after 20 days, 1 day, 2 days, the files are deleted. Same is with slash TMP as well. So when you're writing scripts and your script generates a log file, you want to delete that after a while, put that in the slash TMP. Okay, so you will learn more about proc, dev, sys, and TMP when we head to simple scripts and next lectures of the session. We know what is root, right? Root is the home directory of the root. We are already within root. So if I just do slash root, this becomes the root directory or the home directory of the root. Abhishek, you said, home directory for Ubuntu is slash home slash Ubuntu. Similarly, home directory of Abhi is slash home slash Abhi. But for root, why is the home directory slash root? So root is the only exception. Only for root, the home directory is slash root. Rest, any user that you create, home directories start with slash home. That is, they are inside the slash home folder. This is the only exception. Okay, so this is the home directory of root. Then you have test, basically a test folder. OPT, I already covered it. Then you have run. So what's inside the, oh, sorry, I just need to go to file system and slash, sorry, run. So what's inside the run? So run basically stores the runtime data of the processes. That is, while a process is running, if it has any runtime data, that is stored within the run folder. Okay, home we already covered. Finally, you have something called as etc. And although it is a final one, it is one of the most important folder of your Linux system. Within etc, you have a lot of system configuration files. If you are using a Windows machine, you can somewhat correlate this to the SLE folder. In Windows, you have a C driver, right, or a C folder, within which you have all the system configuration files. Similarly, in Linux, you have a folder called etc, within which you have all the system configuration files. What does that mean? Using these files, you can configure or modify your system. These are just like your settings on your mobile phone or settings on your laptop. I'll give you one example. PASSWD, which is password. So using this, you can modify password of any user on the Linux machine. Let's take another example. Host. So host is a file where you can add local DNS caching for your Linux environment. Maybe you can say that, this particular website has this IP address. Another example, OS release. So this is a file where you have the Linux environment OS details. If I just do cat etc OS release, so you will find all the information about your Linux environment, the operating system, version of it, everything. You have these RC folders where you can just add your executables, and this is the priority of the executables, right? So everything that is related to configuration of your Linux system is added to the etc folder. Again, I'm repeating it. It's just like settings on your mobile phone or your laptop. And this is the most important configuration files of your Linux system. Perfect. So these are the different folders that you have out of the box on your Linux environment. And as we proceed with the next lectures of this course, we will start using more commands from this particular folders. One final question that you might have, Abhishek, if I run ls, okay, you explained that ls should be part of one of these folders, but I am just running ls, right? And it returns the output. I did not instruct the Linux machine that ls is in one of these folders. I did not say which is the correct path of ls command. So how my Linux file system is able to execute it, or how my Linux kernel is able to execute it. Now, this is a very important question. For example, which ls tells me what is the actual location of ls. Ideally, I should have run this command, right? /user/bin ls. Only then it should return the output. If I just run ls, how my kernel is able to give the same output? I did not even configure the shortcut. So there is something called as path on your Linux machine. This is also available on Windows. You might not use it regularly, but what this path does, so this will tell the Linux system that when somebody enters the command or when somebody writes something on the terminal, basically check in all the folders within the path. And if it is in one of that folders, you can directly execute it. Echo $path. You will see that within path, colon is the separator, but you have /user/local sbin, /user/local bin, /user sbin, /user bin, sbin, and bin. Now, if ls command is in one of these folders, only then it will be able to execute. It is in /user/bin, and /user/bin is in the path. That's why ls command is executed. Imagine if this is not part of the path, then when I run ls command, the kernel says, I don't know what is this command. If I just run Abhishek, you will see the same output, command not found, because there is no binary called Abhishek in one of these folders. Now, if you want to add more folders to this, you can append path, you can add more paths to the path environment variable, which we will learn in the future classes. For today's class, what we learned is the folder structure of Linux, and this is more than enough. If you want to revise the topics, you know where to go. And I made it more simple in the documentation. If you go to the README file, I have categorized them into different sections, right? So first, there is a section for the system configuration files and regular configuration files or the binaries. Then you have a section for important system directories, etc, var, boot. Then you have application or user specific directories, which is in home, opt, srv, root. Then I categorize the folders into temporary or volatile directories, which is tmp, run, sys, dev. And then you have mount point directories, right? This will just make your learning more easy. After watching this video, if you go through them, it will become a easy revision. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comment section. See you all. Take care.